Hello, good evening, all of you. It's my great pleasure to welcome all the delegates and attendees to this edition of Club Alumni Meet number 092. My hearty greetings to one and all. I bring you greetings from our chairman, Dr. M.D. Chandrasekharan, our finance secretary, Dr. Mulen, who is already in the dais, from our chairperson, not the speaker of the day. Hopefully, by next month, we'll be meeting. We'll have an in-person meeting. Till now, this is a virtual meeting again. And I thank all the audience for your unstinted support throughout this period. We've been doing this right from March 2020, this virtual meeting, and every meeting has been a great success. We know about it. Thanks to all the participation. I thank you once again. And we are in the 90s, and probably by April 2022, we'll be having our centenary meeting. Non-stop meetings. We got 92 speakers, 92 months, and it's just going great. Thanks to again all the support. For the past 1.5 years, almost in the COVID era, all the meetings have been in and around COVID only. It's the first time after a long time we're having a non-COVID meeting. The topic today, which was is lung cancer. Lung cancer is one of the commonest cancers, and it's one of the commonest cause of death also. The cancer-related deaths, lung cancer is so common. About 13% of the new cancer patients are lung cancer patients, and the 19% of the people who die of lung cancer deaths is there. In India also, the number is ever increasing. We know about it. And with the increasing incidence of pulmonary tuberculosis in our nation, it's very tough to diagnose cancer, differentiated from tuberculosis many a time. And even CT sometimes doesn't do justice to differentiating between TB and cancer, and it's a real pitiable thing that we are into a real fix. And what the most good thing is, overall survival rate of lung cancer, 5 years is so low, abysmally low. Only 5%, 5 to 10% of the people survive that 5-year period. It's also make it so critical to diagnose patients early with lung cancer and to start on treatment. But a lot of exciting things are happening in the field of lung cancer. We should know about it. So only the main thing about this meeting is the exit developments, which I mentioned, is the identification of new molecular targets and the driver mutations, which play a major role in pathogenesis, and that can be addressed with therapeutic interventions. We can go precisely what happens and strike that point, just like our Modi did the precision striking in Pakistan areas in the last summer or so. Like that, personalized medicine, personalized care, personal target is now achievable by using a lot of drugs, the newer modalities. What exactly are these newer modalities and how we go about it? Because exactly the same which our moderator, our board member, Dr. Kodis, and the speaker of the day will be talking about. We're in for an exciting session. I welcome again once and all to part of the session. This is our 92nd meeting. Well, last month meeting was a very interesting one. It was by senior pulmonologist Dr. Narasimhan sir, and our board member Dr. Nardhanan was the chairperson for that. And Narasimhan said he made a wonderful presentation. It was so simple and it was so nice, and a lot of interactions were there. People thoroughly enjoyed this presence. And this again our motto. Again and again we will be talking about this. Should safeguard your lungs, safeguard your life. It's not too late. We know how smoking injures the health. There's so many aspects of smoking. Every one of you is my request to spend at least a few minutes. If a smoker comes to you and ask him to stop smoking, stopping smoking is equal to much more better than any of the therapeutic interventions which can give him. So this we should keep in mind always. And go to our topic of today. Recent evaluations in lung cancer. This recent evaluation has a lot of meaning, and it'll be interesting to see how Satish handles this topic. Yeah, and chairperson is none other our own member, Dr. Kodis, is a ABPS DMRT. We know about him so well. Dindigul IMA president. He is the current president of Dindigul IMA. We are very proud to say that. And he's a senior resident, Department of Radiation Oncology, Regional Cancer Center, Maribel College, Madurai, and Dindigul Cancer Center, Dindigul. And speaker is Dr. G. Satish Srinivasan, young and dynamic person. I met him twice. It's radiating energy all the way. He's MD DNB radiation oncologist. He's consultant and HOD of the Department of Radiation Oncology, Apollo Specialty Hospital. This is exactly what's happening. Radiation oncology, they have a field day as far as lung cancer is concerned. And when I requested him to do that, he immediately readily agreed. I actually thank him for that. He did his MD radiology from Dr. MGR Medical University in 2009, and DNB radiotherapy from NB in 2011. MBBS from Dr. MGR Medical University, Tamil Nadu in 2004. He did a fellowship in FRCR Clinical Oncology in 2017. He obtained ESMO certification in medical oncology, professional diploma in clinical research, and he is affiliated to various societies, even the European Society of Therapeutic Radiology and Oncology. He is a member of prestigious organizations which are very proudly considered. And he worked as a senior resident in JIPMA Pondicherry, which is a center of excellence as far as radiation is concerned, from 2009 to 2012. Then he worked in E-Road HCG Cancer Center from 2012 to 2012. Then as a radiologist at Rajkot Cancer Hospital, Gujarat. He went to Gujarat also, east, west, everywhere is there. Madurai now. And he was radiation oncology in Meenakshi Hospital, Tanjore. And now currently is the consultant at the Department of Radiation Oncology at Apollo Hospital Specialties, Madurai. He attended a lot of courses to enrich his knowledge and transform to the patients, and here to share with them. We've got a lot of beautiful papers. There's a huge list is there. For want of time, just skipping through them. We're so happy to have you, Dr. Satish and Dr. Kutis. Now Dr. Kutis will take over the mic from me. He will introduce the topic, and he will also introduce the speaker. Then we are in for a good session. Welcome again, all of you, and I thank Lupin Respect Division for sponsoring this event. I thank them wholeheartedly for their unrestricted support through all these meetings. Now the stage is yours, Dr. Kodis. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, one and all. First of all, I thank our Club Pulmonale people to... Sir, am I audible, sir?
Very much clear. You're audible and visible.
First of all, my vision is going.
No, unga thala mele irukku, so you should bring it down. Right, that's right. Now you're gone now. Kodis, you're now offline. Actually, see, I think he'll come back again in a few seconds. But you're gone out. He'll just come. He'll come in again. No problem.
Yes.
The precision is the other best thing about what's happening in your field. That's very interesting and always just love to learn about it.
True, sir.
Lot of papers, so many procedures we have done.
As you
rightly told, east, west, north, south. Really great.
Thank you. I think Kodis is back.
Yes.
Waiting to see you again.
Yeah, please.
Sir, am I audible, sir? Am I
Very
audible,
much,
sir?
very much audible.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you're audible and you're visible also.
Yes, I thank
very clearly.
Okay, sir. I am thankful to Club Pulmonale people, Dr. Sekhar and Dr. Mamun, respected Dr. Muralidharan, sir, for giving me this opportunity to introduce my own friend and my well-wisher, Dr. Satish. Being a visiting consultant in Apollo Hospital, I handed everything, all of my cases I handed over to him. He will take care of me. And so, since I am busy with the regional cancer center, he will take all the issues of my cases. He is such a young and dynamic and active person, so friendly, full of human values, giving importance to human values. There is nothing much because all academic things are introduced by Sekhar, sir. So there is more than radiation oncologist, being a cancer patient, more than a radiation oncologist, for cancer patients, human values are very important.
Exactly.
But he is the person, he's the right person for that example. Exactly. So I don't want to waste the time. I just directly hand over the mic to Satish to present his updates. Over to Satish.
Thank you, Dr. Kodis, for your kind introduction. And I thank Dr. Sekhar sir and Muralidharan sir for giving this opportunity to address this forum. When I met him, I was surprised at the efficiency and the consistency of his clinical work as well as academic work. So that was a big inspiration for me. I have been discussing about him at least with 3 or 4 of my colleagues so far. I keep mentioning to this. So, today, as Sir has introduced, the plan is to discuss I will start my screen sharing.
Please.
So that...
Yes, it's come nicely. Yeah. Can you get full screen? Yeah.
The screen is visible now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
You can hide that box. You can
yeah.
hide that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. No, again it's screen.
Just a second. I think it's fine now.
Yeah.
So the topic for today's discussion is I have chosen to discuss only the recent evolutions in lung cancer. The idea being I am not going to go into the basics of how to assess a patient who is likely to have cancer, what are the investigations to be done to differentiate a cancer and a non-malignant condition. All those things I'm planning to skip, and I'm trying to focus only on the recent evolutions as far as lung cancer is concerned. So how do we define recent in this session's context? I had a thought about it. So this is what I have in mind. So what has changed? Basically, like once we finish our PG and come out, whatever comes after that feels like recent to us. So I have taken a time frame of whatever new changes have come in the investigations in the past 10 years and the staging in the past 5 years, and what are the new changes in the management of lung cancer in the past 5 years. I have taken these timelines to describe what is recent in this session's context. So I have made a distinction between principles and details when I'm discussing lung cancer. So what I mean is what is to be done for a patient or what is to be done in a scenario and why it is done. This constitutes the principles of the management, and the details part pertains to how it is done, how we actually go about and do the surgery or the chemotherapy or the radiation part. So this I have comes under the details part. So throughout the slides I have put markers with P and D to show that this is pertaining to principles, this is pertaining to details. So why I have made this distinction today is I want to focus more on the principles today rather than on the details, because the principles will not change, let us say 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whereas the details might change even 6 months from now, let us say with respect to targeted therapy or other such radiation related changes or other things. So the principles will be discussed in details, whereas the details I will give an overview of what is the current scenario. So this is going to be the structure of today's discussion. So to start with, we know lung cancer is divided as ideally approached as non-small cell and small cell lung cancer, because their prognosis, their pathology, everything is different. So non-small cell both again are subdivided into non-metastatic and metastatic. So this is going to be the framework with which we understand the investigation, staging and other aspects today. So when I was trying to see how much is the changes, how much is the evolution that has happened in the past 20 years, let us say, and if we try to plot the advances, the research, the papers published, the changes, evolution with respect to time. So if we were to summarize this 20 years with respect to this lung cancer, if we take small cell lung cancer, let us say, compared to 2020 to 2000 versus 2020, there is not much of evolution in either the investigation, either the staging or in the management. So most of it has remained. If you know what has happened 20 years back, you are probably right in doing whatever you have learned at that time right now, because there is not much has been changed with respect to small cell lung cancer. When we take non-small cell lung cancer without metastasis, that is a patient who has loco-regional disease, patient has no metastasis anywhere. If we take such a patient, the management that has been done in 2000 has evolved significantly now, and there has been many changes in respect to patient selection, with respect to the techniques of radiation, with respect to the drugs that have been used over the past 20 years. Now if you take non-small cell lung cancer who has a metastasis, a patient with lung cancer with either a liver metastasis, bone metastasis, or extrapulmonary disease anywhere, if you take this subset of patients and see how is the management compared to 2000 and now, there has been an explosion in the way these patients are approached, assessed, and planned for treatment. So I think this slide summarizes what we are going to look into. So we'll be looking at what are the evolutions that has happened in NSCLC with metastasis and without metastasis, and we'll be touching upon what is the traditional management for small cell lung cancer. Like, am I audible clearly, or is there any glitches or any issues with that?
You're audible very clearly, and it's very nice. Absolutely no problem.
Thank you, sir.
Kodis, you can unmute. Kodis, you can unmute your mic.
Okay, sir.
We'll all unmute and we'll listen. So there's no disturbance. Yeah.
So, what I have not discussed today, when to suspect the cancer. Suppose a patient comes with chest-related symptoms, cough or weight loss or other things. What are the differential diagnosis? How to go about investigating the patient? That I have not discussed today, and I have not discussed the differential diagnosis of a patient. And I am not going into the different radiological findings, the spectrum of findings that a cancer can present with. I am not going into the discussion part of those radiological findings, and I will not be covering paraneoplastic symptoms, which are a popular topic in lung cancer as such. These will not be discussed today, whereas I will focus on these aspects. So generally, how to follow up a solitary pulmonary nodule. So this is a diagnostic challenge, and the recommendations keep evolving. And the investigations part, what has changed in the investigation, the staging, what are the new the changes that have been included, and the evolutions in management. And in the end, I will be giving an overview of radiation therapy as such in the role of lung cancer. If you take solitary pulmonary nodule, what is important when we basically a solitary pulmonary nodule, we are suspecting a cancer, we want to rule out whether it is a cancer or not. The first step is to ask the patient for any previous images within the past 2 years and compare those images with the current image to see whether there has been a change in size. Basically, change in size is a surrogate for active growth or malignancy. So we want to confirm that the lesion is of the same size over a period of time. That is the purpose of following up a solitary pulmonary nodule. So when we want to, the key lies in measurement. If the size is increasing, the growth is evolving, we need to investigate. For that, we need to standardize what we are measuring, how we are measuring. So it is recommended that the slice thickness should be as precise as possible. Let us say a thickness of 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeter slice thickness will give much more information and clear information than, let us say, a 2.5 mm slice thickness CT. So it is important to measure and quantify in the appropriately done imaging. So ideal slice thickness of 1 millimeter is suggested. And when we are following up a patient, it is mandatory that the images are obtained with the same technique. Same technique means what is the energy that is used, what is the contrast that has been used, what is the quantity, what is the timing. Everything should be ideally the same technique and preferably done from the same center, basically from the same machine, so that the sensitivity issues of the machine does not play a role in showing a change in size. So this is a minimum requirement. This is to standardize what we are measuring. So with this, the usual way the solitary pulmonary nodule is divided is basically less than 5 and 5 more than 8. This is the division. So 5 or less than 5, they have named it as less than 6 mm. Actually, it will be like aesthetically better if we call it as 5 mm, 8 mm, 5 to 8 mm. But they have mentioned it like this, but it essentially means 5 mm. So this is the 3 categories which indicate low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk roughly to show what is the likelihood of progression to a malignancy. So again, the radiological characterization of solitary pulmonary nodules includes distinct terminologies like solid nodule. A solid nodule is, the term is self-explanatory. There is a mass which is differentiated from the surrounding airspace. There is a solid component is there, but there can also be subsolid nodules which present as opacities but not necessarily as a solid mass. A subsolid nodule can either be a pure ground glass nodule. So this is abbreviated as GGNs in often textbooks and journals. Or there can be a ground glass nodule with an overlapping component having solid areas. So these constitute the subsolid nodule part. So why we differentiate this is because the likelihood of malignancy changes based upon the radiological morphology. Basically, a solid nodule can be an invasive cancer or it can be a benign lesion. A cancer which is solid means it already has developed invasive component, whereas a benign lesion quite naturally will be solid. Whereas a subsolid nodule, it indicates probably pre-invasive cancer. So we will come to the pathology part of it later when we discuss it. But this represents a pre-invasive component, and there is a possibility that it might convert into cancer. So this some representative images here. There is an arrow mark that is mentioned there, shown there, which clearly shows a lobulated, irregularly shaped solid nodule. So this will be an example for a solid nodule. And in this image, we can see a vague small ground glass opacity that is almost easy to miss, but it can be a developing invasive adenocarcinoma. So these sort of ground glass nodules have to be followed up, and we'll come to the schedule of their follow-up later. And this is an example for a partly solid nodule. There are areas of ground glass opacities with some cystic changes, but one part of the lesion is also showing some solid transformation. So this will be a very risky, morphology to be followed up. So this is just to show like what is this thing. So now when we come to how are we going to follow up these patients. So now we have categorized them into 3 based on the sizes, the cross-sectional diameters. And on the one side we have the size differentiation, the other side we have the morphology differentiation, solid versus subsolid. And then we have there is a possibility of a patient having single versus multiple nodules. So they have an impact on how likely the lesion is trying to chances are becoming malignant. So we'll take it one by one. At the end, I think it will be easy to have a go at it. So less than 6 millimeter, if it is solid, the first follow-up it is okay to have at 1 year. So I have, if you see, they have mentioned it as a detailed slide. Why? Because textbooks mention, papers mention it as 6 months to 1 year, 3 months to 6 months and stuff like that. For the sake of simplicity, I have put complete figures like 1 year rather than 12 to 18 months. So less than 6 millimeter solid, do a follow-up scan at 1 year. If it is not changing in size, do another follow-up scan at 1 year and then forget about it. If there is an increase in size, then we have to assess it like a probable malignancy. We have to probably take a PET scan or do a biopsy and confirm whether it is becoming malignant. When it comes to subsolid nodules, we have to do a assessment at an earlier stage rather than at a 1 year. We have to do it at a 3 months whether to see whether they are developing any solid components. It will indicate the likelihood of malignancy, so they have to be assessed at a more closer interval. So the intervals are a little slower. So for a lesion which is between 5 and 8 millimeter, if it is single, do an assessment at 6 months. For a subsolid nodules are categorized only in 2 types: less than 5, more than 5. If it is less than 5, if it is single, you can wait. If it is multiple, you have to investigate. If it is more than 5, invariably all the subsolid nodules have to be reassessed at 3 months to document their behavior. So this is about the follow-up schedule. So to summarize, if it is less than 5 mm, less than 6 mm, do at 1 year. Anything else, investigate at 3 months. This will be a rough rule of thumb. So what is the purpose of having this? I mean, how long do you do this assessment? That depends on doubling times. So doubling times, what it means is it indicates volumetric doubling. Suppose a tumor is having a certain volume, how much time it takes to become double the size. That is the doubling time. So for lung cancers, the doubling times can range from anywhere from 100 days to 1000 days. As in, like in 3 months they can become double, or it may take 3 years from some tumors which are visible in the scan to become double in size. So why this happens? Because when the doubling time is long, actually what it means is the lesion has not yet entered the invasive stage. It is only in the pre-invasive stage, and it has not reached the membrane to become invasive. That is the definition of malignancy, right? The invasion of the containing basement membrane. So usually what happens is solid lesions have a faster doubling time, and it is easy to rule them out in a shorter time. Within 2 years, if it is not growing, a solid lesion is not going to grow later. So at the end of 2 years, we can characterize the nodule as non-malignant and we can forget about it. But that is not the case with subsolid lesions. Because their doubling time is very low, they have to be followed up yearly even if they are not showing any changes. So that is the catch with subsolid lesion. They may be not very aggressive, but they need to be followed up for a longer duration to not miss a malignancy. So that is the principle here. So that is about how to assess a subsolid nodule and how to not miss a malignancy there. So let us move on to the investigations part. How do we investigate a patient with a suspected cancer? So the purpose of investigations are actually fourfold. One is to confirm the malignancy, to actually decide whether it's a patient of CA or not. Next is to assess the extent of disease. Extent of disease stands for nothing but staging. What is the tumor spread of the patient at the moment they seek consultation. Next is to assess the nature of the disease. By nature of the disease, what we mean is what is the biology of the disease, what is the growing potential of the tumor, what is the aggressiveness of the tumor. So usually it is characterized, traditionally it is characterized in terms of histology, like small cell lung cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, squamous, adeno, and other such characterizations. Now even more precise characterization is possible by analyzing the mutations and other such immunohistochemistries. So they indicate about the aggressiveness of the tumor. The fourth set of investigation aims at, like, okay, we have decided what is the tumor, what is the extent of the tumor, and other stuff, and we are planning to treat the patient. So we want to assess the fitness of the patient to withstand the treatment. This is an integral part in lung cancer rather than in other cancers, because lung cancers usually happen in elderly individual probably, or someone with a history of comorbidities with smoking and other such factors, so that it is mandatory to include the fitness of the patient in the investigation part itself. So these are the heads why we do investigation. So let us go through one by one fast. So to confirm malignancy, so I want to emphasize some important differences between investigating a lung cancer and investigating any other cancer. Usually we do a biopsy first and then do the staging and then go on to the treatment for any malignancy. So this is the workflow: biopsy, staging, then treatment. In lung cancer, things can be sequenced a little different. I'll come to the reason why later. So let us say we are investigating a patient, there is a nodule in the lung. Let us say it is a T2 lesion. There are no nodules anywhere. So stage 1 and stage 2 patients, they are surgical candidates. So what is the recommendation is, if you think after investigations, if you think the patient is a surgical candidate, there is no need to biopsy the tumor before the surgery. You can plan for a surgery and intraoperatively you can verify the tumor is malignant and you can go ahead with your anatomical resection. So at the outset, if the radiological findings, if the clinical findings are strongly suspicious of a operable lung cancer, there is no need to biopsy. You can go ahead and do a surgery, intraoperatively confirm and proceed with the surgery. So this is something that is not done in other sites. And then before we biopsy, it is mandatory to do a PET CT for any suspected lung cancer patient. Why? Because the PET CT will show us the extent of the disease. So why this is relevant in lung cancer? Because it has a very aggressive potential to spread fast. The tumor may be small, it may be of T1 or T2 size, but it is likely to have spread to the lymph nodes, either hilar lymph nodes or mediastinal lymph nodes, or even to have thrown metastasis because of its aggressive nature. So that is why it makes sense. It is mandatory actually to do a PET CT before you do a biopsy. And another principle that is unique to lung cancer is, you have, when you are going to biopsy, choose a site which is as far away from the primary as possible. This is completely unique to lung cancer. Suppose a patient has a lung primary, a mediastinal nodule, a supraclavicular nodule, and a liver mets. So ideally, what the suggestion say is, go and confirm the liver mets first. If you take the tissue from the liver mets first, if it is coming as malignancy, then you straight away move to M1C stage. So your management is going to be chemotherapy. If there is no need to go and poke into the lung for the biopsy to confirm the malignancy there. So that is the dictum now. So if the patient has no metastasis, but there are only nodes and there is a lung primary, the idea is to go and biopsy the nodes rather than the primary. So go and touch the primary only if the imaging shows no nodes are metastasis. So this is the principle of obtaining tissue for confirming a lung cancer. So if I were to put it in one slide, it is like, don't touch the lung unless it is absolutely needed. That is the what I call. This is what came to my mind once I finished this previous slide. So there are different ways of obtaining tissues. Like being a pulmonology forum, I don't have to go through the details of this. So starting from sputum cytology to invasive surgical method to obtain the tissues, many modalities are there. So when in a particular patient, when let us say a patient has cough and the patient has mediastinal node and a pleural effusion, so which one will you choose to obtain the diagnosis? You can have a sputum cytology because patient has a cough. You can have a mediastinal biopsy. You can also do a pleural tapping. So which one should be done? These are all like difficult questions that requires clinical judgment, assessing an individual patient at that point. We have to balance the yield versus ease of the investigation. So what is the likely yield? Ideally, the procedure should have high yield as well as very easy to implement. So that should be the trade-off. It is very difficult to give rules for this. It has to be individually decided for each and every patient in each and every scenario. And choosing between these things is characterized, like it is described using a term called the efficiency of evaluation. So I like that term very much, that was there in the guidelines. So what it says is, in lung cancer, it is a three-way. Actually, it's these three factors are mutually influencing each other. For example, if you suspect brain metastasis, a lung cancer patient has headache, you suspect the patient to be in 4th stage. So the stage will influence your investigation. As in, like, you will go on do a MRI brain, and your stage is going to influence your management. So let us say, suppose a patient is going to have only stage 1 cancer. So you are probably considering this patient for surgery. So this management will decide what investigations you do. So it's a three-way street actually, where you have to take into consideration for each and every patient all these three factors together, and then decide which is the best investigation to do for that particular scenario. So that is what they characterize by the term efficiency of evaluation. So that is about the obtaining tissue to confirm a diagnosis. Next is to assess the extent of disease, that is the staging workup. This is pretty straightforward. Staging workup for lung cancer is, you roll out metastasis in the lung, the opposite lung, same lung, different nodules, different lobes. You assess liver, lung, bone, brain, everything. So usually it involves a PET CT. So PET CT, what it does is, it shows the likelihood of metastasis everywhere in the body except brain. Brain is not very ideal for PET CT investigation because the baseline uptake will hide any metastasis probably. So it is suggested to do a MRI brain to rule out any brain metastasis if the patient has nodes, or if the patient is being considered for a very aggressive procedure. The idea of doing an MRI brain is, suppose let us say there is a stage 2 lung cancer, we are planning for a surgery. You go and do a surgery, PET CT is normal, and then there are no other nodes or anything, and then you find out the patient develops a metastasis 3 months later. Probably that patient had that metastasis. If you had done an MRI brain, you might have picked it up earlier. Simply because lung cancer is very aggressive at presentation itself. That is why all these investigations are, we have very low threshold for ordering an investigation to rule out a metastasis in lung cancer. So this slide summarizes the staging workup for a lung cancer, that is assessing the extent of the disease. Next comes assessing the nature of the disease, that is how the tumor is likely to behave. So this involves 3 components. One is the plain old pathology, that is morphology. Next is immunohistochemistry, and further comes the genetic profiling. The morphology part is very simple, the basic pathology stuff, the different subtypes of the malignancy, that is squamous or adenocarcinoma. Previously, there used to be a term called bronchoalveolar carcinoma. So in the latest classification, the term has been removed, and what is previously called as bronchoalveolar carcinoma is now called adenocarcinoma in situ, or minimally invasive adenocarcinoma. That is basically an adenocarcinoma which is in the pre-invasive stage. So the good thing about identifying adenocarcinoma in situ is, if they are identified promptly and surgical intervention is done, they have almost 100% survival. So, like in patients who are lucky enough to have an incidentally detected lesions like this, probably a surgical intervention might help them, but unlikely to meet such scenarios in daily clinical practice, I think so. So this is about morphology. So this gives an idea. If it is a small cell, it is going to be aggressive. Generally, we know that central lesions are either small cell or squamous. Peripheral lesions are likely to be adenocarcinoma and so on. So that is about morphology. Next comes immunohistochemistry. So why it plays a role? Why do we know? Let us say we have an NSCLC. It is not a small cell lung cancer. So we can categorize it as NSCLC. Previously, there used to be pathology reports which just said a case of NSCLC. They probably may not mention whether it is a squamous or adeno. Probably they might mention it is a poorly differentiated non-small cell lung cancer and so on. Now the emphasis is on identifying what is the exact lineage. An NSCLC not otherwise specified, that is NOS, is as a diagnosis, as a pathological diagnosis, is strongly discouraged now, and it is advised to do immunohistochemical markers to identify the exact lineage. Why? Because the different lineage has different interventions that are available now. So only if you know what is the exact subtype of the tumor, we can know what intervention to be used for them. Another use for IHC is sometimes it may be possible to have a confusion between whether it is a primary tumor or it is a lung metastasis. Usually it may not happen, but if there is a confusion like that, probably this IHC will help to differentiate any such secondary lesion from a primary lung lesion. So once we identify the lineage, then comes genetic profiling. So for now, genetic profiling is mandatory only in NSCLC stage 4. Because we have seen earlier, only in stage 4 there are actionable drugs which have an impact on the outcome, which have an impact on the treatment. So if the patient has NSCLC on stage 4, it is mandatory to do genetic testing to understand the genetic profile. So why we need to understand genetic profile? Because basically, like, all of cancer is nothing but a genetic disease, as in, like, not a hereditary disease but a genetic disease. A cancer arises out of a mutation. The deleterious mutation either suppresses tumor suppressor genes or activates oncogenes, and this leads to disarray of the cell control pathway, and that leads to cancer. So the underlying problem is only a mutation, and it makes sense to study the mutation, which mutation caused this particular cancer, because that might have an impact on how to manage the particular patient. So this is a screenshot from the latest guidelines. I have just put it just to give an idea of what is the extent of research that has gone into it in the past few years, so that almost we can see almost now 15 different gene mutations, and each gene mutation can have different. The good thing about these mutations is actually so many hundreds of mutations have been identified, but these mutations are mandatory because if you identify this mutation, there is a corresponding molecule, corresponding drug which is available commercially that makes an impact in the patient's outcome. So that is why these mutations are called actionable mutations. It is not like these are the only mutations that have been identified. There are so many other mutations that have already been identified, but these are the only mutations for which drugs have been developed and they have been found to be clinically useful. So that is why they are called actionable mutations. So this is about assessing the nature of the disease. Next comes assessing the fitness of the patient. So there are only 3 treatments. Either we use surgery, radiation, or we are going to use drugs. So quite naturally, there is a difference in assessing the fitness for a lung cancer patient versus other patients. Why? Because in other cancers, we will assess only whether the patient is fit to undergo the procedure now. Whereas in lung cancer involves treating the lung, and there is going to be physiological loss of function, either because of anatomical resection or because of radiation-induced lung injury. There is going to be a decline in the lung function. So it is mandatory to not only assess what is the status now, but we have to assess what is the predicted post-treatment function. So only if that is compatible with the patient's quality of life, we should go ahead and do the particular procedure. So predicted post-treatment function is what we are focusing on when we are assessing the fitness of the patient rather than pre-procedure. Then fitness for chemo is straightforward. We assess lung function, renal function, liver function, and cardiac function. PS here stands for performance status. That is, a patient who is in a good performance status is a candidate for curative treatment. Someone who is already in a moribund state, who is already bedridden, like even if the tumor is T1 and T2, that patient will not withstand the treatment to have a meaningful quality of life. So performance status is a very important factor when we consider a patient for curative treatment especially. So I'll come to the staging. I'll rush through it. So there are tumor categories T1 to 4. It involves 2 components. One is size based, another is anatomy based. Size based is self-explanatory, 3 to 7 centimeters with a different categorization. When it comes to anatomical T staging, anatomy based T staging, a few things I want to mention here is bronchus involvement. So previously, the distance from the carina used to be a factor in deciding what is that, whether it is T2 or T3. Now what they have decided is any main bronchus involvement is only T2, not more than that. Previously it used to be T3 or T4 depending upon the proximity to the carina. Now it has been removed. And the chest wall involvement is, that is involvement of ribs and intercostal muscles, is categorized as T3. And the involvement of diaphragm, carina, trachea, that is more and more central disease or more and more towards the diaphragm, this is categorized as T4. Next is N-staging. N-staging is very, very important in deciding the management for a lung cancer patient. N1 is nothing but hilar lymph nodes. N2 is presence of mediastinal lymph nodes. So this mediastinal lymph nodes will be revisited again and again throughout the management part, if we go into the detailed protocols, because N2 is a watershed stage. If it is less than N2, the patient is a surgical candidate. If it is N2 and above, the patient is not a surgical candidate. So that is why identifying a mediastinal lymph node involvement becomes very, very crucial in managing a cancer patient. N3 implies supraclavicular lymph node. So why this is important? Because even though we discuss all these things, many a time we see only locally advanced patients. So if you get a patient with suspected cancer, if you do a simple investigation, like a simple procedure like palpating the neck to identify any supraclavicular lymph nodes, we can avoid all the other set of investigations. The patient is straight away a N3 tumor. So there is no role for any surgery in this particular patient. With just a palpation, we can decide this patient is not a candidate for surgery. No need for any PET CT, no need for any MRI brain. Straight away, we can put the patient in a non-surgical category. We just need to rule out any metastasis and proceed. So that is about the nodal part. Regarding the metastatic part, previously it used to be only M1. That is like a patient has a metastasis, that is stage 4. Now it has been subdivided into M1A to C. Why? Because within this metastatic subset, different disease burden, patients with different disease burden have different outcomes. That is, someone with a metastasis but lesser disease burden have a better outcome compared to someone with metastasis and extensive disease burden. So to differentiate this differences in outcome, they have categorized metastasis into A, B, and C. For simple remembrance, pleural effusion is M1A. If a patient has single site of metastasis outside the lung, it is M1B. Multiple mets is M1C. So this is about the staging part. Next, how do we manage these lung cancer patients? So I have tried to summarize the entire thing in very short form. So we have 4 categories: NSCLC and SCLC, without meds and with meds. So we'll take the without meds, NSCLC and SCLC first. Previous era, there used to be a difference in management between NSCLC and SCLC for a patient without metastasis. Now that has been done away with, and wherever possible, any non-metastatic patient should be managed, either it is NSCLC or SCLC, should be managed in the same manner. So the first question to be asked in these patients without metastasis is there a mediastinal disease or not? Is there N2 disease or not? So how do you assess if there is a mediastinal disease? By doing a CT chest and ideally a PET CT. So if the patient does not have a mediastinal disease, which means the disease is confined only to the lung, either with the primary alone or with the hilar lymph nodes, which means the disease is within the lung alone, does not spread outside the lung, and such patients ideally should be subjected to surgery. Surgery has excellent outcomes if we do it in carefully selected stage 1 and stage 2 patients after doing proper staging workup. And usually the surgery will be followed by chemo, because lung cancer can have metastasis elsewhere even after surgery. So this is an important question that we need to ask in a patient who has no metastasis. Is there a mediastinal node or not? Nowadays, so what we see is stage 1 and stage 2 patients, there is no disease elsewhere, disease is confined to the lung, patient is a good candidate for curative treatment, but they might have comorbidities, might preclude surgery in such patients. They might not have adequate pulmonary reserve. So what happened was, radiation was started to be used as an alternative to surgery for these early stage patients, and precision techniques have been used. Conventional radiation techniques will not deliver curative doses for such small lesions. So we had to use precision techniques like SRS and SBRT. That is, we'll come to that later. And what it has shown is, initially the results showed that they are actually equal to surgery in patients who are inoperable. for medical reasons. A patient is a candidate for surgery tumor-wise, but not a candidate for surgery physiology-wise. So those patients were subjected to radiation, and what we saw was radiation was as good as surgical outcome radiation had. So eventually they choose radiation as an alternative to patients who are medically operable also. So the most recent results, what they are showing is they are equivalent to surgery, but the results are probably yet to mature, and probably in a year or so radiation will be a first line treatment as a primary treatment for a lung confined CA lung, NSCLC. It is probably likely to be the scenario in a year or two. If the patient has a mediastinal disease, all question of surgery goes out. There is no role for surgery in that patient. If there is a mediastinal disease, that patient has to be subjected to radiation plus chemotherapy. It's as simple as that. So now let us come to metastatic disease. So NSCLC with metastasis. As I mentioned earlier, we have to do genetic profiling, check for any actionable mutations, and then if a NSCLC patient has an actionable mutation, that patient straight away, the treatment of choice for that patient is only targeted therapy. Targeted therapy implies drugs which act upon specific gene mutations, interfere with the pathways that they have deranged, and make sure that the cell proliferation signal is blocked. So if they have mutations, targeted therapy are the first choice without any query. This is a panel of what are the likely drugs that can be used in a patient with actionable mutations. If you can see this ALK rearrangement, if we have here BRAF mutation, we have EGFR mutations. So these drugs are used in different stages, like first line, second line, or in combination with other sensitive drugs or other chemotherapy drugs. So this is just to give an idea of the palette of options available for a stage 4 NSCLC patient now. So that is about the mutation positive metastatic patient. If the patient has no actionable mutations, we have to go back to our plain old chemotherapy, cisplatin paclitaxel or cisplatin gemcitabine, and usually these patients have a much worse prognosis than those who have an actionable mutation. So the survival probably will be in the range of anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So that is about the management of metastatic NSCLC. Now let us come to small cell lung cancer. Small cell lung cancer, so far there has been no research that has come up with any drugs, targeted therapies that are effective, clinically effective in small cell lung cancer. We are still sticking to the plain old cisplatin and etoposide based chemotherapy plus wherever needed palliative radiation. Prophylactic cranial is an interesting concept that has a role in small cell lung cancer. So why it has come is because small cell lung cancer has very high propensity for developing a brain metastasis, more so than non-small cell lung cancer. So a patient might have disease only in the lung. If we give chemotherapy, patient might have a good clinical response, but within a short period, they may develop a brain metastasis. So this happens so often that they started doing trials to see whether we can prophylactically irradiate the brain to address any micrometastatic cells that are there. And it is found to be effective in delaying metastasis in those patients who have received radiation, brain radiation, compared to those who have not. So now prophylactic cranial is routinely included in treatment protocols for SCLC. So that is about the management of non-small cell lung cancer. To summarize in one slide, for a non-metastatic patient, if there is no mediastinal disease, if there is no N2, we can operate the patient. If the patient has N2 disease, no role for any surgery, go ahead and do radiation plus chemotherapy. For metastatic patients, if they have actionable mutations, choose targeted therapy. If they have no actionable mutations, the only resort is to use chemotherapy. So this is a one slide summary of how generally a lung cancer patient is likely to be managed. So I think I'll take a short break here. And is it is it okay for me to proceed now, sir? I think the time is already 9:50.
You can, sir. 10 minutes you can.
Yeah, I'll finish in another 5 minutes or so. So I'll give an overview of how we use radiation therapy. Generally, in overall cancer, solid tumor cancers, radiation is essential to cure almost 80% of all cancers. Without radiation, it is not possible to cure. And what is important when we use radiation to treat a tumor is both radiation and chemotherapy both are called cytotoxic treatments. They differ from surgery in that in surgery we are going and removing the tumor and throwing it out. It does not matter whether the tumor is sensitive or resistant. There is no concept in surgery. But when we are using a cytotoxic treatment like radiation or chemotherapy, it is mandatory that the tumor should be sensitive. Then only it will have an impact. As far as radiation is concerned, for sensitive tumors, they are as good as surgery as far as lung cancer is concerned. But if the tumors are resistant, they are as good as no treatment. Unfortunately, so far, like we have different markers to assess sensitivity for different drugs. We do not have yet any markers to see whether a tumor is sensitive to radiation or resistant to radiation. That research has not yet happened, or it has not produced any results. So far now, we irradiate all patients, and 80% of them will have probably good sensitivity, and 20% might be resistant. So that is the scenario now. And previously, when radiation was used, there used to be a lot of toxicities because radiation, it is its nature to go through and through. It will go through the normal tissues, reach the tumor, and exit through normal tissues. The radiation going to the tumor will cause cure. Radiation going to the normal tissues will cause the side effects. So, but with the evolution of computer-aided technologies, with the evolution of precision machines, we are able to deliver radiation more and more focused to only the area where the tumor is likely to be rather than the surrounding areas. So with this, what happens is the toxicity has gone down enormously over the past 20 to 25 years as far as radiation is concerned. So generally for a radiation course for a patient, it is delivered over a period of 5 to 6 weeks, 25 to 30 days. Daily radiation takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And the patients are usually immobilized during treatment. So that because we are treating for 20 25 days, the radiation is a physical treatment. If the patient lies a little, let us say a patient is shifted a little up or down, the radiation will go to the area, unintended area. So it is mandatory to immobilize the patient during treatment to ensure that the radiation goes to the area where you want it to go. And usually there is an impression sometimes that the patient is radioactive. Patients used to come and ask like whether we can go near kids and do other stuff. Patient is not radioactive when you are using radiation therapy with linear accelerator or cobalt. It is so when we are doing a PET scan, we are injecting a radioisotope into the patient's body. When we are treating a patient with radiation, the radiation is in the room and the patient is placed in the room. The room is radioactive, but not the patient. So that is the thing. So the principle, I will try to explain the principle of the precision technologies in a few slides quickly. So suppose let us say we have a skin tumor. So initially they used radiation only to treat skin tumors. So what they can see is they can see the tumor in the surface. They can focus the radiation on the patient, and the tumor reaches the radiation reaches the tumor first. There is nothing between the radiation and the tumor. So treating a skin cancer is a child's play when we are using radiation because we can see what we are treating. But when we are treating a solid organ tumor, when we are treating a solid tumor which is inside the body, we have to deliver radiation to the tumor. And usually the tumor is surrounded by a lot of normal structures. It can be heart, it can be great vessels, it can be what you call bladder, any organ named the site. So your radiation, before it reaches the tumor, it passes through normal tissue mandatorily. So this is the problem in treating any solid tumor inside the body. So that is why this need for precision technologies come into play. How this is implemented is the scope, that discussion is beyond the scope of this presentation. That is probably in a technical thing we can discuss. But the bottom line is this: you have two things nearby. You have to aim precisely and shoot precisely. Then you will have the result of what you want. That is the holy grail of radiation therapy. Deliver dose to the tumor, avoid dose to the normal tissues. So this is the palette of techniques that are there available in any radiation department for a patient to be chosen. Previous era cobalt treatment, we used to call it a two-dimensional radiation. After that, it has evolved into a linear accelerator. With the help of linear accelerator, we can deliver anywhere from 3D CRT, that is 3D conformal radiation, to IMRT stands for intensity modulation, IGRT stands for image guided radiation, and so on, and other techniques. The latest technique is the proton therapy that has been installed in Chennai for the first time in the entire Southeast Asia. They are basically what they do. If we move from the top to bottom, what they all do is the same thing. they make sure that the radiation to the normal tissues is progressively lower and lower. So you can deliver more and more dose to the tumor. You can probably has a better chances of curing the patient. So that is the principle of these different techniques. So when it comes to dosing, there are two different ways. Traditionally, we will see patients undergoing treatment for 5 to 6 weeks. But now with the precision techniques, what happens is the dose to the surrounding tissues are almost zero. We are delivering dose only to the tumor now. So this gives us the luxury of delivering the entire dose in a short duration, like so let us say 1 day to 5 days. So very small tumors, we can deliver the entire radiation delivered over 6 weeks within a single day safely, because the radiation to the other structures are completely avoided. So this procedure is called stereotactic radiosurgery. So what it means is it will have the same impact as doing a surgery for a patient, provided that the tumor is radiosensitive. So this is the new thing that has evolved in the past few years, that is compressed dosing, that is short-term radiation using stereotactic techniques. So the advantage is the patient can go home in 1 day. They can finish their entire treatment in 1 day and they can go home. This is the expansion, stereotactic radiosurgery. And usually sometimes some patients, the tumor may be a little bigger, that it is not possible to deliver the dose within a single day. So those patients, they may be delivered over a period of 5 to 7 days or 10 days. So that is called, instead of radiosurgery, that is called radiotherapy using stereotaxy. So this is an overview of immobilization. So what we do is we make either plastic molds that retain the shape of the patient, and this plastic mold is fixed to the couch so that every day the patient's position is reproducible. Sometimes what we can do is probably we will use vac locks, which again take a body impression of the patient. So once the patient lies down, it will take an impression. We will create a vacuum and it will create a shape of the patient, reproduce the shape of the patient. And even if the patient is removed, it will retain the shape. So every day the couch will be placed on the treatment couch, this vacuum bed. And when the patient lies down, it will be in the same exact position as in day one. So the idea is to have reproducibility of the patient position. The machine is not going to change, the couch is not going to change, the patient is only going to change. So we have to ensure reproducibility throughout the entire radiation course. So I'll just go through this image guided radiation quickly. So let us say we are treating the patient on 3 different days. We have positioned the patient reasonably well, but still there can be millimeter size variations in how the patient is positioned between day 1, day 2, and 3. So what I have shown here is the radiation beam. Here is the blue thing is the tumor. So if you can see day 1, there is perfect match. Suppose in day 2, the patient is lying at a few millimeters off. Grossly, the patient is lying okay, but inside the body, the tumor can have minor displacements, and it will lead to the tumor being not treated, part of the tumor being not treated, and here there will be part of the normal tissue that is being treated. So this is a intrinsic problem when we are treating patients over an extended period of time. So how we overcome this is, so this is a sample, this is a demo linear accelerator. So this part, the blue part above, is where the radiation beam comes. The side arms are actually a inbuilt CT scanner. So what it does is, after positioning the patient, it does a scan in the couch itself and it takes an image. And what it does is it superimposes this new image acquired on whatever day, 5th day or 6th day, with the image that was taken on the first day to see if there are any displacements. And if there are any displacements, the movements can be corrected sitting from the console itself by using buttons. Make sure that the exact position is attained, and then we will deliver the treatment. So this is how we address interfraction variation. That is, interfraction is day 1, day 2, day 3. Between these fractions, there is a variation in the patient position. So this is called image guided radiation therapy. There is lung cancer, there is another problem, that is intrafraction variation. Why? Because in lung, the tumor is inside the moving organ. With the patient's breathing movement, the tumor will keep moving. So if you want to irradiate a patient who has a uterine tumor, you just need to point and shoot. The tumor is not going to move, but a lung tumor is going to be continuously moving throughout the treatment. So how are you going to deliver radiation to this without affecting the surrounding tissues? So one simple way to do that is, suppose the beam is on now. So beam is on, but the tumor is moving in and out. So what happens is probably 30 to 40% of the lower edge of the tumor, left edge of the tumor, might not have received radiation if we use it like for other sites. So what we can do is, we can probably make the beam bigger. So this we call target volume. So by increasing the target volume, we can make sure even if the tumor moves, it is receiving radiation. But there is a problem with this. What? Because half the time, areas which have no tumor, that is a normal lung, are getting irradiated. So this is the problem when we are using a bigger target volume. There is a way to address this. So that one way of doing it is called tumor gating. In tumor gating, what we do is we irradiate the patient only when the tumor is within the radiation beam. When the patient breathes and the tumor is moving out, we switch off the radiation beam. When it comes back, so now the tumor is moving, again it has come to the inspiratory position. Now we irradiate the beam. So what we do is we place trackers in the tumor. We track the respiratory movement. When the tumor is in a particular place where it is within the beam, then we give the radiation. This is called tumor gating. There is also an option called tumor tracking. These require high-end sophisticated software where it in real time it tracks the tumor and it delivers the radiation. So these are some of the techniques that need to be necessarily used in lung cancer to make sure that you are not missing the tumor while safely avoiding the lung. So this sort of 3D localization plus incorporation of the movement in time. So that is what is called as 4D radiation. So these are some of the advantages that have made things like SRS possible. So I think that concludes my slides now. Hand over to you.
I think Satish, it is a wonderful presentation. You are covering all the latest techniques, SRS, SRT, up to respiratory gating. I think it is very new to everybody in our place. I think this respiratory gating technique, all the things are slowly coming in. Nowadays, we are now need to go to all the way from Madurai, Chennai, Mumbai, Madurai. It is now available.
Exactly.
But these SBRT techniques and all experts are now available in Madurai itself.
We are already doing now in Madurai. Exactly.
So all updating techniques we are doing here, and Satish has got a wide exposure. And I think the session is very useful to all the Club Pulmonale members. Thank you once again for this opportunity. Thank you.
We had a lot of the learning today, sir. Excellent learning. A lot of new points we learned today about how advanced things are going. No, it's unbelievable.
So these advanced things we are doing in Madurai, sir.
Yeah, that's great.
Nobody knows.
That is the information. We have got the new information, learning points.
Respiratory gating, SBRT, just like that we are doing, sir. And Satish in Apollo also we are doing, sir. All are doing, sir.
Yeah, so moving tumor, tracking it, really
all new. We have a lot of new points.
All of it is enabled by the advancements in the technologies. The continuous research is going on in the physics domain. So
the understanding, Satish has made it very easy, sir. The respiratory
crystal clear. Update. It's a wonderful update.
He's a very good teacher. Slowly, steadily delivers point by point. It's become very clear. A lot of good clarity about how symptoms of CA. Anybody can talk how different. That's not usual topics, but this is very new avenues, which is very useful to us.
In those days, they are saying radiation. They'll all get frightened and the things.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's like a VIP treatment. Just like that, they can come and go 1 day or 3 days, because that's what we call it as hypofractionation. Instead of going for long fractionation, one day dose we'll call for fractions. We'll have hyperfraction. In 30 days, 30 naal current out. But nowadays we can finish it up. Within 5 days, 6 days. It's available of SRS, SBRT, and other techniques.
Unless we know, we can't teach our patients. No, we got clarity today. Satish, really wonderful, Satish.
Thank you, sir. Previously, what we used to say was because of radiation toxicities, a curative patient will become from a cancer patient, they will become a radiation patient. The cancer will be cured, but they will have radiation-related side effects. Now, the effect of this thing is they completely forget that they had a cancer 6 months from the treatment. They will have no side effects at all. So they even forget to come for the review. We have to focus them and call them for review. So that is the quality of life difference that precision radiation has made to patients actually.
Actually, I had posted one question, sir. Will prophylactic radiation to the brain in the small cell cancers will
Right,
affect
sir.
the brain function anyway?
That's an excellent question, sir, actually. So, brain function is a general term. The focus right now is what they have identified as radiation dose to the hippocampus part of the brain. It has an impact on the patient's cognitive abilities after irradiation. So, what they see is if the patients who have been delivered radiation to the whole brain, they do not develop metastasis, they do not develop disease, but they develop declining cognitive function or memory disturbances post radiation.
Oh.
So, after identifying hippocampus as the site that is responsible for this thing, now techniques have been developed where we deliver radiation. It is called hippocampal avoidance radiation. So, we deliver radiation to the brain while avoiding dose to the hippocampus. Actually, hippocampus is embedded inside the brain, but we still make sure that no dose goes to it. We mark it, exclude it, and then deliver radiation. And that actually has made an impact in having patients having meaningful cognitive function post
That's very important. That's very important.
It's
And actually, when you target a beam towards a cancer, to the cancer spot, nodule, whatever it is, how do you avoid radiation to the intervening surfaces, intervening tissues?
That is actually
Yeah, separate topic he told.
basically what we do is summate, sir. If you use one beam, the proximal part will receive more radiation. Suppose there is a tumor here, there is a normal tissue here. The beam comes down, normal tissues get more radiation, now tumor is receiving the radiation. Suppose we do with 4 beams. What happens is this part, everything gets only 25% of the dose, whereas where everything is combining, it gets 100% of the dose.
Oh, right.
So like that, if you split it into every 2 degrees, one beam, 180 beams, in the entire 360 degree, only in the area where there is overlap of all the beams, there will be a high dose area.
Physics, as Cody is told, advanced physics has made all this possible. Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Any more questions? Audience can post their questions in the chat box. Our speaker will be glad to answer. There are no more questions. Muralidharan will propose a vote of thanks and we draw the curtains on the enterprising session with Satish and Cody.
Good evening, friends. Really, for this wonderful session, I feel happy to propose a vote of thanks for such a nice, energetic. We could see young people nowadays doing better job. Actually, usually this type of clarity we used to get from the teachers like 50, 60 years old. The young age, I think around 30, 35, I don't know. But at such a young age, you are giving such a clarity, a steady deliberations. No word extra, no word additional words. You made such a focus, like beaming on the tumor. Your words are such a measured words, and every word is meaningful. Really, as our Cody is told, a lot of learning points for the non-radiation oncologist doctors, general doctors like us. We learned so many things because unless we learn, unless we know the techniques and features, we cannot advise our patients. Once we get a patient, there is a nodule in the lung. If we want to refer, now the police is nearby, I can talk to him over the phone and send the patient. But when we come to know these type of facilities available in Madurai, I can very well educate the patient and convince the patient, nothing to worry, everything, all these things we can do. Such you have given such a good clarity. You are talking about these principles and the details, and you are focused on one important thing. Don't touch the lung unless it is needed. And it's a very catchy point, because we should know what not to be done. More than what to be done, we should know what not to be done. And finally, you touched upon this efficiency of evaluation. All the finer details is made such a wonderful thing, and so really we enjoyed such a in the night starting by 9:10. Now it is 10:10. Really, you have made this evening as a meaningful, fruitful evening. Really, God bless you. Thank you very much. And all our members of the Club Pulmonale are very much benefited. I thank the Lupin people for having arranged you, and I thank Dr. Segar for identifying the right person for this talk. And Cody's made a wonderful moderation.
Wonderful.
Really unforgettable. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks for the kind words, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you, Cody. Thank you,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah. Can leave.
Good evening,
Dhruv?
boss.
Good evening, boss. Oh, Allah, செம்மத்தே முடிச்சிட்டீங்க.
இல்ல நீங்க
Dhruv?
அழகா பண்ணீங்க. இன்ட்ரோ பண்ணீங்க. கோடிஸ் ஃபாலோ பண்ணாரு.
ஆமா.
அதனால இட் இஸ் வெரி ஈஸி ஃபார் மீ.
ஆமா.
Thank you, boss. Good night.
Thank you, boss. Good night. Good night.
So, sir, with your permission, we'll conclude the session. Sir.
Yes, sir. It's a wonderful session. நல்லா போச்சு. And as usual, we want the recording through. They can.
Yes, sir. I'll send you tomorrow.
Okay.
And I already send you the screenshot on WhatsApp, sir.
Okay. Thank
By
you.
the way, it's Vikas, not to Dhruv and to Om.
Yes.
Yeah. Good night.
Okay. Thank you. Good night.